Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. Now, the website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. And now, today's episode is the first of 3 episodes that I did with Brittney Boyd Bullock. This interview was recorded on April 24th, 2024. Now, we don't really have sponsors for our episodes, but if we did, it would be brought to you by the expression timestamp, which was something that Brittney did when she came in to do a presentation, a stunning presentation for my professional practices class at the University of Memphis. Brittney is such a powerhouse and has done so many things in her life. And so every once in a while in the talk, she would say, timestamp, 2016, or whatever. And so as a way of like letting us know where we were in the chronology of the earth. And so, and it's become a thing that I reference all the time on with these interviews. And so I'm very thankful to Brittney for bringing me the expression timestamp. Okay, again, this is the first of 3 episodes that I did with the great Brittney Boyd Bullock. It was recorded on April 24th, 2024. Enjoy the interview. My initial point is like, what's your earliest recollection of art?
Yeah. It's a great question. Because I feel like
You're fine.
my first recollection of art isn't in the visual art sense.
Okay.
Or maybe it is, let's explore it, right? Why don't we? So I remember specifically this like desire for my mom to introduce us to theater. And so to me, that's my entry point, right? There was a huge emphasis on, theater productions, going to the theater, church plays, that kind of thing. And so I was really enthralled with the production of that. Wow, costumes and, actors and sets and things like that. And then I think from there, looking back on it, my first recollection would be just the art and the things that were hung on the walls, right? And how those things were hung very specifically, right, to draw your attention to certain things, and salon style hanging, right, before I knew what salon style hanging was.
Well, thinking about that, what kind of things do you remember being in the house?
So I remember specifically an image of my mother when she was younger, a professional photograph that was taken of her. And in all my mother's glory, she had this really like fancy updo. And my mother had, I'll never forget it, she had a gold tooth with a star in the and I was like, okay. But they were these like really professional photographs of her. And then I remember other photographs taken of my sister and my cousin, very, poised and positioned in a way of like stature. And then there was like these landscapes that I have no idea of their origin. Other images of family members. And I feel like in every almost, Black Southern household, there was an image of Jesus on the wall, right? That coveted image. And then I also remember too, like my mom would like create these rooms in our homes that was like themed, right? So we had like a leopard theme room where you would go in and it's like leopard everywhere. So like rugs on the wall and like this like poof leopard couch yeah, it was wild. And then there was one point where we had an oriental room.
Okay.
And so there was like all of this like, imported Asian China influence, like, little cabinets and all this kind of stuff. So things were thematic in my home. And when I was growing up, I think I may have mentioned that I liked Winnie the Pooh. And then she like decked my room out to the gods. Very like maximalist, Winnie the Pooh everywhere, curtains, wallpaper, rugs, trinkets, bedspreads, right? So there was always like this desire, I think, to thematically capture what the sense of the home was going to be or is, right? And although that didn't compute for me as art, when I look back on it, this idea of the interior, right, is very much that. So I would say those would be my two recollections of how I experienced art in that way. But it wasn't until way later, like adulthood actually, that I visited an art museum. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, just to back up just a little bit.
Sure.
So thinking about your home, so I can't remember, siblings or no?
I have one older sibling.
Okay.
She's 7 years older than I am.
Okay. And then your mom's background sounds like super creative, thinking about this sort of outward expression.
Doesn't profess to be.
Was there any other part? Did she ever do any dabbling in some of the drawing or painting or ceramics or
Nothing.
anything? That definitely feels like it was scratching an itch that was there.
I would agree. I think my mother, if she had to go back and choose, she was really interested in like dance. Like she wanted to be a dancer. Mm-hmm. And so if I were to choose a creative knack for her, it would be that. She tells the story all the time about when she would go to the New Daisy Theater, mm-hmm. and they would have like these talent competitions. And when she was very young, she went down and she did the talent show, and her and her older sister did this like dance to James Brown, and they won a Coke. They won a Coke and like maybe $1 or something like that. And she was like over the moon. And then all throughout high school, she danced. And so I think that would be her thing. But when I decided that I was an artist, right, I would ask people in my family, like, where did I get this from? Mm-hmm. Just thinking like this was some kind of genetic gift.
Right.
And could not pinpoint anything until recently. And I would say maybe 4 years ago. I don't have a relationship with my father, so I grew up in a single parent household. But I know who he is, and he knows, who I am. But I was talking to my aunt about something. So my paternal grandmother was in the hospital, and I was visiting with her. My aunt was there. And we were just kind of talking, and she was sharing stories, and my grandmother would pop up every now and then and share a story too. And this might have been more than 4 years ago now that I think about it. But my aunt mentioned like how well of an artist I was. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. And she was like, yeah, your dad drew all the time. And I was like, didn't know that. Right. And so she said that he would come home and could be found in his room drawing. So never seen a drawing, never seen him in the act of that.
Right.
But yeah.
But it seems like that, when you were talking about the creative impulse and then the environment building that your mom was doing, to me, like, as you said that, my brain was like, well, of course, Brittney does like all of these different things. Like your approach is so multivalent that it would make sense. But now you were talking about wanting to go to the theater and see that stuff. And then when you were there, you would sort of notice the stage and the mm-hmm. backdrops and the costumes and sort of the full... almost like the systemic approach mm-hmm. where it's like everything that's involved in making this thing. And so how were you exposed to that? Was that just like normal stuff at school or through?
Yeah. So oftentimes I was in the play. So my mother also had a really big emphasis on like introducing us to poetry, and like, so we did all the recitals. And so there's a poem that I've been reciting since I was 5, and I still know it because I rehearsed that poem so much, and I would say it all over the city. Like, people would.
We should have gotten you to do that when we were doing the sound check. That would have been the thing if I'd only known.
If you only know.
What was it, just out of curiosity?
The poem is called I'm Determined to Be Somebody Someday by Dr. Brewster. Yep.
Okay.
I can recite that poem right now.
Might as well.
Okay. All right. Here we go.
It's such a build-up.
Okay. I'm determined to be somebody someday by Dr. Brewster. The present condition and dark circumstances may make it appear that I have not a chance. The odds may be against me, this fact I admit. I haven't much to boast of, just a little faith and grit. In spite of things that stand in my way, I'm just determined to be somebody someday. That's a part of it. You want me to say the whole thing?
Yeah. Duh.
Okay. My head may be bloody, but my skin may be black. But nothing will throw me off the track. I'll climb that ladder round by round until my feet touch higher ground. And when I do, just remember what I say. I'm determined to be somebody someday. I think there's another verse. I can't think of it.
That's pretty
There's
great.
one more verse.
Well, I mean, being a big fan of poetry myself, but not when I was a kid, only later. I mean, to me, that is a big part of it too. I mean, thinking about how important poetry is in terms of getting people to think about what's there in front of you, but also what sort of lays under the surface in terms of metaphor and all that yummy good stuff. I mean, that seems pretty great. Now, was there other, not that I'm going to ask you to recite any more poetry, but was that, you were saying poetry was kind of a component of it, and then I wonder was that something that your mom was also just sort of raised with or around?
So there were other poems. Like, I remember reciting Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou and some other of her poems. And so I think that when I think back on it, and it's interesting you asked me this question, because I've been doing this introspective, like, deep dive of myself as well, to draw further connections with me in my work. And so when I think back on, I think the desire that my mom had for me was like, and she also put me in beauty pageants. We can talk about that too. But I think that it was maybe twofold, like this understanding that she wanted to instill in me the essence of what these poems, stood for. But then two, I think she had a desire to, like, just push me in the limelight. It was almost like the spectacle of this, like this really cute little girl dressed to the, nines, and like, and I was good at it. Like, I would, like, do the theatrics. I would, like, do the miming of the poem as well. And
Now, how old were you at this time?
Yeah, like 5. I think from the time from like 5 to maybe 10, I was reciting poetry and singing. Yeah. And so I would literally do like a church circuit. Like, I would go to churches, and like people would call my mom to put me on the program, and then I would show up and I would do this, like, this song and I recite this poetry, and I would, like, really kind of get the audience engaged, and people would, like, standing ovation. They would come up to me after. It was a thing. It was a thing. So yeah, I don't know if part of that was also me living out her dream in a way of, like, I think in a way of wanting to be in the limelight. My mom is also a grizzly granny. Do you know what those are?
Sure.
So she, I think she just had a natural, like, desire of wanting to be in performance in some way. And I think that she saw that I was good at it and that I could do it. And so she pushed me into it.
Now, what about, like, as a kid, were you making things? I mean, obviously you were talking about the performance and things like that, but what about, like, where do you think this tactility of yours was born?
I would say I always made things. So my first recollection of that would probably be like 5th grade. And I would make these like makeshift sketchbooks where I would like get these protective sleeves, and I would like draw pictures of cartoons and things like that and put them in the protective sleeves, and I carried this binder around. And then I met a friend, and we would do it together. So she then bought a sketch, and again, having no idea that sketchbooks exist, that this was a way to like archive your thoughts and your artistic interests. None of that. I'm just like, I like to draw and I want to protect this drawing, so I'll put it in this protective sleeve and I'll carry this binder around. And I remember very early on like pulling my binder out and like thumbing through the protective sleeves of like, oh, look at all these Winnie the Poohs I drew. Right. So that would be the first memory. And then I think after that, my mom would take me, and I tell this story often though, but my mom would take me to like a craft store, and she'd say, okay, you get one thing. And I would buy like yarn, or I would buy like a latch hook kit, and I would spend my weekend, right, latch hooking. And I did that for a while. And then I really loved the material of yarn. So I also used to like take disposable ink pens, and I would wrap the yarn around the ink pen, and then I would make a pom-pom to put it on top, and I would sell them at school for like $1. So I would like make them all overnight, and like I would have like a bunch of them with different color combos and all that, and then I would go to school and people would buy them from me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so this kind of like, when you would go to these craft stores, would this be something where your mom would be there anyway, getting some stuff to sort of be, you know?
I don't think so, actually. And I feel like, here's what I say. I feel like if she were there to get things, it was probably like those fake floral things. Like it wasn't necessarily to purchase like, art materials, but she might be making a floral arrangement or something like that for the house, but it wasn't for her to seek out any kind of art material to do something, or spray paint. We would buy spray paint because we would go to the yard sale on Saturday mornings, and then if she bought like a little trinket or something, we would spray paint it so that it could go with the decor of the home, that kind of thing. Or she would just take me because she knew that I enjoyed that kind of thing.
Now, what about like with friends? Like I know when I would go over to friends' houses, they would be completely different, in terms of like, all their cups would be, plastic or store-bought or whatever. And then, of course, I think about my poor kids going to their friend's house and being like, where's your art gallery? I don't understand. Yeah. And where's your dad make paintings? Where does he do that? And so what about like when you were a kid, did you notice the difference, or did you have friends who were also, like you were saying, you had the one friend that you would hang out with, and you guys would work on the sketchbooks and stuff together. Was there a crew where you had kind of an art affinity together?
No. I think that I think in my family it just was not, it wasn't a condition or a norm for us. It was just like, we experience, I think, the visual aspects of art through an actual experience, like, again, going to a play, or we would like, I remember the Levitt Show used to do like a yearly kind of picnic. And so we would go there and, and look at things there, but it wasn't a thing in my home. Like, it just wasn't.
No, you were saying the first time you'd been to an art museum was in high school or later?
It was later.
Okay.
It was much later.
And what was, it sounds like when you said I didn't do this, it sounds like it was a specific memory. Is there a specific memory in terms of visiting for the first time?
I'm trying to think the first time I actually entered into a museum. I don't remember exactly. I just know that I was much older. Now I did take art in high school, but the way that I got there was actually not the best, because and now I'm trying to think, did I go to, I don't think so. But yeah, I don't remember my first time actually entering a museum, and I feel like it might have been through Jamond, actually. Yeah.
And then, so you were saying you took art in high school.
I did.
And so, like, it sounds like you were like a real hellraiser. And
I was.
They put you in there. Oh,
They
really?
did.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
I was.
Well, you kind of alluded to it, and I was like,
was.
I bet Brittney was just a hellraiser,
I
and they stuck her in there
was.
as a punishment.
And it was, yeah. So I went to performing arts. I went to Overton Performing Arts School, and I got in through theater, because I was not zoned for that school, right? So I had to audition. I auditioned, and I was in theater the first 2 years of high school. Well, because I was so problematic, allegedly problematic. No, it was problematic. The theater teacher was like, yeah, no, she's got to go. She's got to go. And my mom was like, you have to go to this school, like, because the school that I was zoned for, it was like, nah, wouldn't be a good situation. And my mom was like, we got to figure something out. And when I figure it out, you better get your shit together. Like, don't like get it together. And so I was like, okay, well, I do draw, I do. And so I like showed my portfolio to the art teacher, and I got in. And so I spent the last 2 years of high school in art.
No, I mean, that school is so well known, and it's
is.
such a fixture in terms of the mythology of the city, as the visual, or as the art school performing visual, etc. So tell me a little bit about that, because I think maybe you might be the first person that I've talked to that's had that Overton experience.
Yeah. So I knew that in order to get into that program, that my portfolio had to be solid. And I had been drawing, in addition to the theater stuff that I was doing. And I think, I don't know, Hamlet, I think it was just like a little bit of grace too, of like, and just an understanding of like, I can't go to the school that I'm zoned for. And just a promise of like, I promise I will do right in here. Here's my drawing ability, and I was able, to be accepted. And then when I knew that I couldn't mess that up. And so I was all in at that point. And my teacher at the time, so it was Dr. Rook, who was there, who retired years ago, and then Miss Burton. And so I took most of my classes from Miss Burton, and she just introduced me to so many different, like the formal techniques and the medium of things, right? So it was in that class where I started painting and thinking about composition, and like really learning the techniques and the principles of art and design in that class. And I fell in love with it. And
now, was she also showing you stuff?
For sure. I think that the works that she showed were like the masters, though, right? I don't remember anything contemporary, but it was much more like, the Picassos and the Kandinskis and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, she also had a really big emphasis on like the act of creating too. Like, she would show us work, but she was really dedicated to like, and you need to be working. Like, let's hone your skills in that way. Also, understood that I wasn't the best at it. And so, there were some students in my course who were like, this is what I'm doing. And so that, there was a really big focus around that too. I was just trying to stay at Overton and graduate. But I fell in love with the idea of being an artist, I think, right?
And I would imagine that shift from hanging out with theater kids, no shade on theater kids.
Totally different.
Some of my favorite children of mine are theater kids. But that's a radical shift from, in my mind, from the theater crew to the art crew.
Yeah.
What was it like being in there with them? Were there people in there that you were just like, man, they're so cool? Or you were talking about how you realized you weren't necessarily the best, but I'm curious what kind of atmosphere that room was, or those rooms were.
Yeah, I feel like in the art space, it was clear to me, like, and although this wasn't spoken, but it was clear to me that there was a separation of skill, right? I also felt too that like the students in the art department were way more serious about like what they had going on. You know what I mean? It was like they were. It was a different type of dedication to the craft that I feel like I didn't experience in theater. In theater, there was dedication there, but it was a lot of like fun. It was fun. It was like light. It was airy, right? We're just kind of, sometimes just hanging out. But in the art department, it was like, no, like we got work to do. Like we're on a path here. We're applying to art schools. Like there was just a different tone and tenor, I think, in the art department than it was theater. So yeah, I felt like too that, and this is very interesting now that I'm saying it out loud, of like, depending on where your skill level was, at least this is my experience, it kind of like you were then kind of grouped with certain people. Right. Which is interesting now that I say that out loud, because it feels very similar to the art world.
It's like the strata. It's like these are the kids that are here, and there are the kids that are really here, right. And then there are the kids who really can't do anything but this. Right. Yeah. I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
But was that like thinking about that experience? I mean, I know high school is such a difficult time for so many people, and for me, the art classroom was such a sanctuary from all of the other pressures and just the stuff that happens in high school, in movies, where it's just like and I was a real nerd, and so like I was the art nerd. And really, we were talking about this the other day in class, actually. Some of my students were saying that they actually had a kind of like cachet because they could draw, because some of the other students would see it as a kind of like superpower.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they were kind of talking about that, and I hadn't really thought about that or processed that in that way. But I think for sure that was a way that I was sort of kept safe, or and then the hands-off category, because I could draw.
Yeah.
But what about for you? What was the environment outside of the art room like?
Yeah, I definitely felt like your ability to draw definitely gave you some leverage in a way, or protection too. It's interesting though, because I didn't start there, right? And my start in high school was the theater department, and I did not, like, I had to make all new friends in high school because I came from a middle school that wasn't the feeder school, right? So everyone was already like in their friend group. Most people were like, oh, we went to, Colonial together. And so I was coming in as a totally new student. And so when I wasn't in theater and now in art, it was like, oh, you do that too, right? I was kind of like the kid who, was kind of bopping in and out of all things, right? And so, I don't necessarily know if I was seen specifically as the art kid. I think I was more so of like, Brittney is into a lot of things, and art is just also one of those things.
And then once you made that transition, you were able to like your mom said, stay in school, or stay in this particular school. What was the reception like? Like, were your parents like, oh, okay? Or was your mom kind of like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you're doing this? Or was it just like, of course you can do it?
I think there was a level of some surprise to that, right? And then I remember also too, and again, telling my story also just kind of reminds me of how entrepreneurial I've been for a very long time. Because I say that because when my mom saw that I could draw, and she would show other people, then people would ask her, could she draw me a whatever? And I was with my cousin last weekend, and she pulled out this very old drawing that I had done of her child when I was in high school, and it was framed and all that, and I was like, oh my gosh, that drawing is horrible. But she covered it. She was like, oh my God, I was like, oh, wow. But yeah, so I started to like sell drawings. Like, oh, you want a drawing of your, you know, your dad or your kid or whatever. And so I kind of was like selling drawings for like, you know, $40, $50. And yeah, and people would like pay me to draw their family members. And so, yeah, I don't, my mom, like, she wasn't like, you know, super surprised by it. And she wasn't also like, oh, this is a thing you should do either. She was just like, oh, this is a thing that you're doing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about with these interviews is how totally varied the response is from the family, you know, and how some people were just like, oh my God, this is a horrible idea. And then other people are like, of course you're an artist, you know? And I mean, I like that thing that you were saying about the entrepreneurial spirit in the work from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that totally makes sense. And then how did you decide to go to the university?
Yeah. So high school was ending. And I didn't, to be honest, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was very independent in high school. So my 12th grade year, I had 2 jobs. I was living on my own and paying on my own bills. And so
You were living on your own? Mm-hmm. Like you had your own apartment and stuff?
Yeah, I was renting a home. Yeah, and it wasn't my full senior year, but like I wouldn't. So I graduated in May. I want to say like December to May. I was like, I had my own place. I had 2 jobs.
Just because you've set the precedent, what's the timestamp?
So I graduated high school in 2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what were these jobs you were doing?
So I worked at a golf course.
Okay.
And then 2005, where was I? I was working at Kroger too.
Okay.
Yeah. And my job changed. It's so funny. Now that I'm telling the story, my job changed at Kroger like 4 times. I was like the fastest cashier. Okay. Because that was important to me. And then I went to and I was a good cashier to where I wouldn't throw your groceries. Like I was fast, but also very attentive. So there's that. And then I worked in produce, and then I worked in the bakery, and then I worked in guest services because, you know, I would just keep being promoted. But anyway, so it was Kroger and a golf course. And the house that I was renting, so on the street that I lived on, my mom still lives in this house. I lived in the same house my entire childhood. On that street, she had bought a house like 5 doors down. And so she bought the house and fixed it up. And I asked her if I could live in it. And she was like, yeah, you just need to pay me rent. And I was like, I can do that. And so I moved out all my stuff. I moved down the street and I stayed in that home and I paid her rent. And I worked 2 jobs and I went to high school.
Wow.
I bought my first car when I was 14. I bought my own car.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then you decided to go to University of Memphis.
No.
So
right.
Oh,
okay,
my bad. I'm jumping ahead. Hang on.
So in high school, wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And to be honest, I wasn't sure about college. Like I was like, I'm not, you know, I don't know what I'm really interested in. I don't know what I want to do. I didn't do any kind of college visits. I didn't apply for scholarships. I barely applied for college. My older sister, she was off on a nursing path. Had gotten a full ride. Like she was a track star as well. Like was, you know, doing great. And there just was not much of a, I think, emphasis and or like a nurturing, I think, for that. And my mom, who went to Shelby State at the time, she was like, well, you know, you should go into nursing. Like, you're smart, you know, you could do that. You'll have a job for the rest of your life. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. So I went into that and I hated it. I did that for like 2 years. And I was in like my prerequisites. And I was like, I don't like this at all. And so I secretly applied to MCA and I didn't tell my mom because I was nervous about that.
And then not that it pertains to anything, but what was it about this nursing path that where you were like, whoa, no,
Everything. Like it's everything. And like I didn't like science. I love the idea of like, you know, helping people and being like nurturing and of service, but like I didn't like science. I didn't like the fact that you have to wear scrubs and you can like dress up your outfit. Like I didn't like that. I didn't like the idea of you know, when people are sick and they don't get well. Like it was just a lot. Like I didn't care for blood. I didn't care for like needles. I didn't really, but I had a heart of like, I want to help, but not in this way. And so I was still like, even after high school, I would buy canvases and I would like paint landscapes and stuff in my room. And I just still had like this desire to make things and to create. So I would like, you know, when I graduated high school as well, there was a point where I transitioned from those jobs and then I was waiting tables. And so I had like cash on hand very easily. So I would like go to the store and buy canvases and, you know, and just paint in my room. And I was like, I kind of like this. I like this. And so I, in high school, they would make you like give your portfolio to MCA for them to review it. Right. And so I had done that. So I knew about art. That probably maybe, okay. So, right. That was my only college tour, but that was like, because I was required to do that. And I remember taking my portfolio around and, you know, the professors were looking at it and they were just like, it was discouraging, we'll say. So I was like, well, probably not going to do that either. But again, I was still painting. And so when I knew that I didn't want to do nursing, I was like, I'm going to make some paintings. I made a few things. I'm going to submit my portfolio. And I remember taking my paintings. I didn't have the fancy black, you know, zippered up, whatever. I remember taking my paintings to MCA. And I'd never forget the face of this woman, but I forget her name. But if I saw her today, I would know who she is. But I remember taking my paintings and was like, I think I want to maybe like go to school here. I'm not sure how that worked. And so she was in financial aid. She was so sweet. And she was like, okay, you know, this is what needs to be done. This is how you apply. I'm going through all the things. And I'm like, okay. So I applied and she, you know, told me how much it cost. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then I got in on a partial scholarship. And so she called me back and she like walked me through all the things. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I need to tell my mom. And so I told my mom and I was like, hey, I'm not going to do that nursing thing. I'm probably going to like go to this school and like see what's up with that. And she was like, excuse me? Like, what do you mean? Like, how are you going to live? How are you going to eat? Like, that's not viable. How are you going to be an artist? And I'm like, I'm not sure, actually. I have no idea. But I know I hate that other thing. And so I'm going to try this. And so she was pissed. She was really upset about that. And, you know, hindsight, she just wanted me to be, you know, cared for. She wanted to ensure that I could live a life and care for myself. So, yeah, she took me down there. And I remember the day where she took me down. And this is how I know, like, she was accepting the idea, is that when we were getting ready to go to MCA, she had bought me one of those fancy black portfolio things. And she was like, put your art in this. And I was like, okay. So we took it down. And so we put all my stuff in and I went back down and my mom was there. So we did all the financial aid stuff and I enrolled. And I went there for a couple of years. And it was the hardest time of my life.
No, what was it that made it so hard?
I think a couple of things. Entering into that space already like not fully aware of what I'm doing there in a way, if that makes sense. Like being an artist wasn't echoed to me in my life. I'm trying this thing because I like to paint. I never really been affirmed that I was good at it in a way, right? But I had, I think, a really great work ethic, and I had tenacity for like I like doing this, and so therefore I'll do it over and over again until I get better. But it was discouraging because I felt like that was the mindset that I had, but I was also not as good as the other artists, right? Not as good as the other students, right? And so I remember being in like drawing one and there all night, like trying to perfect the drawing and really like giving it my all. And I just could not get above a C in any of my classes. And that was discouraging to me because I also, you know, in high school, I made really great grades with 2 jobs. And I'm like, what? Why is this so hard? You know, it's art. Like, why is it so hard for me? And so I remember the one time that I got like an A on a drawing, and I was like, yes, okay. So it's possible for me. It's possible for me. But I pulled an all-nighter for that. And like, I was in the drawing studio just nonstop of trying to perfect this drawing. And it was clear to me too that during that time that there were students that were much more like into the craft and had been studying and working on that for years. And so in a way I was playing catch up. I felt like I was playing catch up a lot. And then I took a class that was all about ideas. Like it was professional. It was like practices, ideas and concepts or something like that. And so you had to pick like two themes that you were interested in that you would want to make work about. And so I picked landscapes, and then I picked like the Black experience. And before you present it to your teacher of what your themes were, you had to do a little bit of like research on those topics. And I had done that. And in my research, I'll never forget this. Like, this is a core memory. It was the first time where I saw the work of William Popel. And so I found it online in the library, and I was like, this guy is interesting. He's crawling on the ground. What's happening here? Like, he's got text in his work. Super like interested about that. And I was like, yeah, okay. I want to make this like my top theme. And so I brought it to my teacher, and I was like, okay, these are my themes. I'm really leaning toward this. I'm interested in this. And she was like, well, I don't know if you're like ready for that. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, there are a lot of people already kind of making work about this. And she was like, I really feel like you need to maybe spend your time elsewhere. And I was like, I don't. And she was like, I think landscapes would be good for you. You should probably pursue that. And I was like, okay. And had I known now what I knew then, I would have maybe addressed that differently. And I remember at that point, I was like, yeah, this isn't the place for me. I was also like one of like 5 Black students, and it was very hard for me to find my community there.
Well, I mean, one of the things that totally blew my mind when you said Popel was in part because I think if I were a freshman or a sophomore and I came across Popel's work, my cynical brain would be so loud. And it would be like, this guy is just crawling on the ground. He's not very good. He's not even drawing, Hamlet. You know,
I was dialed in.
I love that. I mean, that totally blows my mind. Now, and so like, I want to crack that open and just ask about it a little bit. So had you seen other things that were, and P.S., this totally reminds me of, I was talking to Terry Jones, and Terry was talking about going to school at, she went to Atlanta College of Art, and she was kind of telling a similar story, and I was like, wait, I don't understand. Like, it took me years to even think that conceptual work was work, that it wasn't, because it needed skulls in it, and it needed, candles and paint and stuff like that for it to really be real art. And it had to spend a lot of time on it. And so, like, when you saw that, was there a precedent in your head where you had seen work like this before? And Popel's from outer space.
He's like,
I mean, you know what I mean?
Beyond
like, even
what I could even imagine.
Among contemporary artists, like, he is in a rare from outer space zone.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I love Popel. Yeah. But for sure is in kind of like an outer space thing. I wonder what it was about that work that clicked in your brain that felt right.
I remember the day in the library when I stumbled upon his work, and I'm not quite sure how I got there. I probably had like Googled Black art or something like that. You know what I mean? And even before then, right, my understanding of Black art was like I forget the artist's name, but the very famous artist that would do the elongated like arms and legs and like, it's a very much staple style in the Black interior, right? But when he came up, I was like, wait, this is in the canon? Like we can consider this? And it's probably too because it was so performative. And I had grew up in this like, space of like the idea of performance. Maybe it would be why I was drawn to it. Like, oh, this is cool here. Like, I want to explore that. And I remember that sketchbook so vividly of like me printing that out, cutting it, and like putting that in my sketchbook and really being drawn to that. But it had to have been like a Google search of just like Black art. And that was like he was one of my first.
Because, I mean, of course, like, what we would think of as like the Black romantic artists would come up, and that would be of a particular school. But then I would think way at the bottom of that page, as you scroll and scroll and scroll, like I can't imagine. Yeah. I mean, there's a part of me that's kind of visualizing that scrolling process, and then you like seeing Popel in the Superman outfit. And
in the streets of New York.
And I think for me.
Or Chicago. Might have been New York or Chicago.
New York, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, for me, that was. For me, the thing that was the entry point for him is the humor, and how I can't remember how I came across him, but it might have been through the book, The Friendliest Black Artist in America.
Oh, sure.
And, and of course how can you not open that book with that title? And then, there he is on the cover and he's in this plastic bag, and then on the backside, he's like carrying a cow and he's got eracism written on his chest and he's pouring out milk or something, or he's pouring milk all over himself. Anyway, like, so those were, for me, sort of the entry points. I feel like we could have just like a whole, like, Hamlet Nerds Out on Popel
for sure
podcast, because he's so interesting. Now, what were some other things? Because, I mean, it sounds like from the very beginning at MCA, you were seeing lots of stuff that was really interesting and really challenging. Were there other things that you remember?
No, so, when I'm thinking about that time, like, I think I saw him and it may like had stopped there. And then I think the idea was like, take it to my teacher so that I can get approval on this exploration. And I didn't get the approval. And I went landscapes. Right. And so, and I did the art history classes and things like that. But of course we weren't in contemporary, art made by Black Americans. Right. We weren't in that. And so, it stopped there. And it wasn't until, and I've shared this with you before, but it wasn't until I got to the University of Memphis where I took a class by a visiting professor where that window opened and literally changed my life, right? Changed my life completely. But while at MCA, I feel like if I had to kind of categorize the totality of my experience there, it would be that MCA opened my eyes to the technical aspects of art making. And I feel like that the culture there was very much about like the skill of the work, right? And so that's what MCA did for me, was like really kind of inspire and nurture this idea of the way you work and how informed your practice should be and how informed you should be in the craft of what you're making. MCA did that.
Now, you were saying that you were one of maybe like 4 or 5 other Black students in your class. It took you a long time to find your community there. Do you feel like you did eventually find? No. Okay.
And when I say in my class, like I didn't even take classes with those students.
Right.
I just so happened to see them.
Right.
I do remember that.
I mean, because it's such a strange thing. I mean, obviously, going from Overton, I don't know what the background of Overton is. If I remember right, it's typical of the city. It's in the 60%. And so, like, to suddenly find yourself in an almost like exclusively white space, that must have been strange.
Very.
And then also thinking about how you have this sense that you're catching up and that you have this sort of like, you maybe don't necessarily belong, or you're not on the same skill level as these other kids, and then also this sort of discouraging moment with the teacher. And that sounds really strange, and it also, no shade on MCA, it falls in line with a lot of the other things that I've heard from other people of color who've gone to school there.
Yeah, sure.
And then, but were there teachers there that were important? I mean, you were talking about learning about the skills. I mean, I think your work has got so many different aspects to it. Skill is one of them. But were there teachers or were there cohorts there that were particularly important to you that you want to give a shout out to or to mention in terms of thinking about history?
Yeah, I feel like I forget the professor's name, but there was a class that I took, and it was all about collaging, actually. And it was like a 2D course where we would have to build composition by, the figures and things that we would cut. And so I enjoyed that class very much. And I enjoyed it because I felt like that professor really was interested in the curiosity of making more so than anything else. And so I appreciated that course quite a bit. I wish I could remember it, but I remember the things that I would make in that class. I wish I could remember his name. But that would be the one professor.
It'll like come to you as you're driving home. And then we can just
I'll text you.
We can just slide it in there. Like that's usually what happens. I get these like texts from people and they're like, "Oh, that wasn't so and so. That was so and so, or that wasn't Degas. It was Toulouse-Lautrec, or whatever."
Yeah, right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. For sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think thinking about that, how was University of Memphis even on your radar? Because I mean, from some people I've talked to, they'll say like, at MCA, nothing else was on their radar. They were only thinking about themselves and sort of being deep in it. P.S. It's not a bad thing to do. But just like it was very, we're doing it here and this is what we're doing. We're not even thinking about the competition or anything that's happening at U of M or CBU or Rhodes or anything like that.
Yeah. There was a point in the journey where I, again, because at such a young age, I understood finances, and I was like, I understood like bills quite clearly. Yeah. And there was a point in the journey where I was like, I'm getting this partial scholarship, and I'm grateful for that, but it's not enough. And I remember being in the financial aid office trying to like make it work, and I was like, I already don't know what I'm going to do after this. And it doesn't make sense that I would be in so much debt after this and not have a plan. And so part of the decision was not only that I couldn't find a community there, but it was also just like a logical financial decision for me that I had to make. And then at that point, it was kind of like, okay, if not here, then where else is there an art department? And it was the University of Memphis for me. And that was the choice that I made.
And so what was that transition like? I mean, I say this as someone who was on the faculty when MCA sort of dissolved and we absorbed some of their students. There was this like moment where we would be doing the tour and the students would be like, do I really have to take algebra, or do I really have to take blah, 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 blah? Because we have there's so many gen ed things that are in there. What was that entry process like for you? Was that tough?
It wasn't because, I had already taken a bunch of those courses.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, all of those credits transferred for me. And so when I got to University of Memphis, I had a few more things that I needed to knock off. But most of them were like, like I remember taking anthropology, which I love that class. I remember taking the interior design class, which I actually teach now, which is bizarre. I remember, but I didn't have to take like biology or algebra. I had already done it. And so the transition for me wasn't that, daunting. I had already knocked it out. And so those credits just transferred for me. So most of my time at the University of Memphis was art classes. So it was just like a continuation of what I started.
So you were talking about taking that interior design class, but what do you, what was the part where when you got to the U of M, you were like, oh yeah, this is right. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. Or was there a moment of recognition, or was it just kind of like, the frog in the boiling water, where it just sort of slowly gets hotter?
That.
Oh.
The latter. Him, in all, transparency, I don't think I got to the moment of this feels right in the act of making or creating. I think I got to the moment of this feels right when I saw other Black folks who look like me making. Right.
Like, give me an example.
Yeah. So I knew that I had a desire and a heart to create things. But again, I didn't always feel like that. I was the kind of artist that it took me a while to get there. Like, I was a slow burn artist, right? And still am in a way, right? It's like it took me a while to understand the material to then build that up to something that I felt good about. I'm not the kind of artist that's like, okay, I'm gonna create this thing, or I'm gonna paint this thing, and it doesn't take me a while. It takes me a while to get there. Like, I never really felt like I had just like a natural skill and to do something. You know how does that make sense? Where it's like,
oh yeah,
you know how some people are like, they could just paint that thing really well, and it's like that thing. But it's like, no, I'm working at this long term. Like, I am really in deep with this thing to really kind of build the skill that I need to build to create it. And so that's the kind of artist I was in art school. It was like, I have these ideas that I want to pursue, but I gotta cook. I'm gonna be a minute, be a minute to cook it. And so, as a result of that, and like looking at my peers and seeing them, what feels like a natural gift, I knew that necessarily wasn't my journey. That my journey was like, cook it, gumbo, cook it long time. And so when I say that, it wasn't until I saw artists who looked like me in that art history course there where I felt like, oh, I belong here. It's because, like, when I'm in this art history course and I'm looking at artists like Radcliffe Bailey, and I'm looking at like Lorna Simpson, and I'm looking, all these folks, and I'm like, oh wait, there's a whole, like, what? Like, blew my mind. And it wasn't until then to where I thought, okay, there is space for you in this world. Like, there are others out here doing this thing, and so there's a place for you. And I think that's how I got to it.
And what was that class? You remember?
Absolutely. I still have that syllabus.
Great.
So it was black and white contemporary photography. So the first class I took was all about, like, it's where I learned about Gordon Parks, and so that was one class. And then she taught another class that was just about contemporary art, so all genres. So the first class was all about photography. Man, I'm so grateful for having this interview. All of these connections are coming forth now with just even my love for imagery. But it was that course, and then it was she taught another course about just like the contemporary art of people of color.
Now, who is this? Who is the teacher?
Julie McGee.
Huh. Okay. I
teaches at University of Delaware.
Okay, I didn't overlap with her at all. I don't know her.
Did you? Okay. But she had because I asked her how she got there, because she was leaving, and I was like, I have so much more to learn. Where are you going? And she was like, well, I'm a visiting professor. There was some kind of program.
She was a Hohenberg chair.
Maybe.
Okay.
Sure.
Because the Hohenberg chair is someone that we bring in. They're there for a year. They teach 2 classes. They're ninjas. They're almost always just the most badasses, and their energy is super infectious.
She was incredible.
Okay, that makes sense.
So much so that after graduating college, I kept up with her for a little bit. She's sent me some things in the mail. Like, I feel like I need to reach back out to her. But yeah, she teaches at the University of Delaware. And then I also remember too, I went to the High Museum in Atlanta some years back, and because I wanted to go to the David Driscoll show, which was amazing. And I'm walking through the exhibition, and sure enough, she pops up in the interview because her and David Driscoll were like friends. I was like, that's Julie So yeah, changed my life.
Okay, so just because it's on my brain,
Okay.
I love how when people will mention particular artists, when they're like, "Oh, this person blew my mind," that they were there, you know. So like you talk about Popel, and so just because I love both of those people, let's talk about Radcliffe Bailey for a second, and then
Yeah.
Lynn Lorna Simpson. So what are some things that you remember resonating with you?
I remember specifically seeing that the installation that he had done with those piano keys. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And then I also remember seeing like these like mixed media collage pieces that he was like using all this different media to portray. But one of the things that I admired a lot about Radcliffe Bailey was like his intentional like storytelling and this like this legacy of story that he was very interested in telling, from his like a personal standpoint and a historical standpoint, but also kind of bringing that to modern day. And I just remember watching like I remember reading an excerpt about him, but then also watching an interview being like, man, the way in which he weaves story together I'm very interested in, and the way he visualizes what that is I'm also interested in. And then
But also, like, from an outsider's point of view, like seeing you in the world and seeing Radcliffe in the world, like, to me, you both have a real powerful connection to the objects. And then how sometimes it starts with the object, sometimes it's like the piano keys or whatever. And then that thing will ask for another thing, and then the story will sort of dictate where that thing is. You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
And so there's a kind of like, but then there's also, like, I think sometimes with you and with Radcliffe, like, you'll have the idea and then you go to the toolbox and see what's in there. And then sometimes it's about the materials, and then it becomes this kind of like almost like a narrative game of chess where it sort of leads from one place to the other, or a conversational game of chess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right. Now, what about Lorna Simpson?
I think for her, it was the way in which she looked at imagery, and I feel like her work has such a, not simplistic, but it's just like, it is what it is kind of way. But the way that she kind of, takes an image of a magazine, and then she pulls out the hair of that through watercolor. It's like this idea of taking what we know and just reimagining even just a portion of it, and how we would then be invited to think about that thing in a different way. I found that interesting, and her use of like photography in a way was super interesting to me as well.
And were there other people that you saw in those early classes that really sort of sparked you in terms of, because I mean, one of the questions that I always love is when people will ask, like, what's the first artist that you really fell in love with? They do that on that A Brush With podcast. But I mean, to me, this thing that naturally happens without me having to even ask is saying, like, well, what are some things that you were seeing? And then just like boom, 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 you've got these three giants with Popel and Radcliffe and Lorna Simpson.
Yeah, James Van Der Zee was another artist that I was enamored by. Artists in New York taking these very luxurious photographs of Black folks, just in their being, right, and in their space, and like looking at these very stylized, in a way, photographs of Black people was very, like, I was into that. Like, tell me more about this, right? I'm trying to think, who else did we talk about in that course? There were so many that I feel like were inspiring. Of course, everyone's name is escaping me.
And that's okay. Now, of course, you're also taking art classes at this time. You're not just taking the art history classes. What are some things that you're seeing in the art classes, or what are some things that you're being exposed to, maybe that felt obviously different from MCA, but maybe that felt particularly germane to your what you're interested in?
Yeah, I feel like in the art classes, it was a very, I think, a different way of working, in that the conceptual thought was really key here, right? Whereas, and you know, I spent maybe a year and a half, 2 years at MCA. So who knows that maybe if I continued that journey, that I'm pretty sure the conceptual thinking would have been pulled out, right? But when I got to MCA, because I had done my prerequisites when I got to the University of Memphis, because I had done my prerequisites at MCA, now I'm in the conceptual thinking of things, right? Like, what is this work about? And it just felt like so much coming at me at once, like so much information entering into my brain, where it's like, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by it, because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so interested in what's happening in my art history classes, and I'm trying to make some connections between like identity and like me and my art making, but I'm also still trying to figure out the art making, and like I'm just like, man, I need more time to cook. I just need more time to cook. And so the work that I was making really kind of turned into like this idea of beauty and how I'm seen, right? And so I started to, like, I was really into W.E.B. Du Bois, and I'm thinking about like this idea of double consciousness, and thinking about like how Black people are, you know, show up in the world, and I'm just like on fire, and I'm trying to make these connections with the work. And I remember being in my sculpture class, I remember making this bench that I then created another bench that like went through it, and then I painted like this floral motif on the bench, and I was talking about this idea of double consciousness, and how, you know, and relating that to an image that I had seen, I think maybe by Gordon Parks, where or the work that Deborah Willis, that was another person that I was reading a lot, reading her works about this idea of you know, even the skin test, and like the mother and child, and when you bring your child to a mirror, and the mother tells the child, you know, who they are very early on, and like how that spirals into double consciousness. So all this stuff and I'm trying to make sense of it. I'm trying to make meaning. And so I made this bench, and then where this other bench kind of came through for this idea of like parent and child, and how, you know, there's an impartation of identity between the two, not only from a physiological standpoint, but also of like identity standpoint. And so I was like carrying also this floral motif between the two benches to denote even my experience of like furniture that I grew up with, right? And so I'm just like trying to make meaning of all the things that was coming at me, and it was a lot.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, I think for us as teachers, sometimes we can just kind of take that stuff for granted. You know, it's like, well, of course you're being exposed to a lot of things, and of course you need time to, you know, ruminate and sort of think about these things and chew on them and digest them, and then try and figure out how they fit with you. But it's complicated, especially when you're seeing stuff that you have never seen before, and especially when you're not only wrestling with the technical aspect of it, but also the philosophical and the conceptual aspect of all of these things, and then also being exposed to lots of other things. Now, you were talking about the readings that you were doing. Mm-hmm. Were these readings things that you were doing on your own, or were they a part of some other kind of curriculum, or how?
They were part of that course. They were a part of that course. And so I remember, like, we would have these articles that we would need to read and journal about, but then we would also have text for the course as well. But I was so into it that I would go to the bibliography and would buy other books. And before I knew it, I had a whole library of things that were not even on the syllabus. So I was like, I'm going to read this, and I'm going to read this, and I'm going to read this, right? And I want to learn more about this, and I want to learn, like, I'm still on that learning journey. And like, I still get excited about all the things that I was picking up in that course. But she lit a fire. I don't know if she lit a fire, because I feel like I had a desire for it. I think not necessarily lit a fire, but she affirmed so much of what I wanted, and she was into it too. She's like, yeah, and read this and read that, and like, look at this. And I was like, and then when she told me she was leaving, I was like, where are you going? Like, I'm just at the beginning of this. Like, I need your stewardship. Like, you can't, you know? And even when I contacted her after she left, she sent me more literature. Like, she was all about my learning journey. And that's what I needed. Like, I think in a lot of ways, someone to affirm my interest in the ways in which I was going, and also affirmed that like I had so much more to explore. And she was that for me. So yeah.
That's really, I mean, for me, one of the things I also think that a lot of people might not get is that thing about the affirmation. You know, like I think one of the things for sure that I've kind of come across when I made that transition from Rhodes to U of M was that, you know, I think a lot of the Rhodes kids, from the very moment they were born, they were told that their ideas were really valid and really interesting, and good Lord, will you please tell me more? And at U of M, it really is like, hey, I'm about to ask you a question, and I'm asking you a question because I actually want to hear what you have to say about it, you know, and I'm actually curious about what you are saying about it. And I think a lot of times, like especially the first year students that I'm dealing with, they're like, wait, what? And then I'm like, and when you say that thing, I'm not going to make fun of you, and I'm really curious, and I kind of want to know what you think about it. And then also this thing about the affirming, you know, I think so much of that is a kind of like a so many people will take it for granted, you know, and I think like it's such an important part of recognizing that that's really what we do at those first generation universities, or not just in terms of first generation students, but just in terms of students in general. And so, I mean, I'm interested in that in a lot of ways, you know, in terms of talking about affirming, because it seems like where you were coming from, there was a lot of affirmation. I mean, it seems like, I mean, aside from this very momentary thing where your mom was like, oh my God, you're going to be an artist. But like, it seems like you had mad support and mad encouragement, you know, from the very beginning. And I wonder, I wonder what it was about that particular experience that was so impactful. I mean, obviously the affirmation, obviously seeing people who look like you making art and thinking about that. And then I could also see it just being like a conglomeration. I guess I'm just answering my own question. But to me, that's really interesting. And then, of course, selfishly, I want to know how they did it so that I can do it, you know, and I know that you also want to know how to do it because you're a teacher too.
Exactly, yeah.
And so, like, do you think, are there things that you take from that as a teacher and you're like, oh, I got to do this?
Absolutely. I think that, I think because I was so vocal, and I feel like you could probably read it on my face in class, and in my demeanor and in my body language, how leaned in I was, right? And I think that because that professor was so attentive, and saw that she also leaned in. I think that, you know, as a teacher now, I think sometimes even with me, I can lose that attentiveness because I'm so into the content, right? The content of what they need to be learning, or you know, what they need to know when they leave here. And I think that if I could offer anything, it would be that how do we slow ourselves down to be attentive enough to our students and what they need. And then I also think, to your point, to ask, what do you think you need? Who are you right now? Like, what are you interested in? What are you curious about? And then I think that that's just not a one-time question. It's kind of like a continuation of like, okay, and what do you think now? You know? So that's what I would say. And I think also too, what I saw her do was like, she had a very clear understanding too that like not all of us were entering into the content at the same point. Right. And so we all had different like entries, and we all had different interests, and we all had different like you know, things that were resonating with us, things that felt resonant. And so I don't know, I just think she paid attention.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, I think a lot of times people can just they can obviously be presenting the information, but then paying attention to the students and the things that they're thinking about and looking at. I mean, obviously that isn't something that everybody does.
Right.
And then I wonder, so you were So you were at U of M at that time, and then you were obviously also being exposed to a lot of other things in the community. What are some things that would you go out and see things that were happening elsewhere, like other shows and other institutions, or?
Yeah, no, I wasn't. So I feel like if I, as I'm tracking my journey, right, and I'm at the University of Memphis, there was a point in that journey where I took quite a bit of time off, right? So I had entered into the University of Memphis, had done some classes, and then I didn't go back like for several years. I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years, and I just focused on working. I had a really great job. I, again, had bills, very independent. And I focused on that. And I was like, yeah, I'm not quite sure what the art thing is going to be, what I'm going to do. And I'm an adult, and I really just need to, I'll figure it out. And I think another like turning point for me was meeting my meeting my spouse now, who was all 10 toes into art, like pursuing an art degree, like was pulling all-nighters to finish the thing. He would like pull up at Starbucks and like literally paint in Starbucks and like made it his like studio in a way, like publicly paint. And he was all in.
Now, where was he going to school?
He went to Lemoyne.
Okay.
Lemoyne.
That's interesting. Now, was he from Memphis? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what about Jamon in terms of thinking about his high school? Was he also?
Yes. So Jamon's experience as a child and in high school.
Right. We'll just like fork off and we'll be like, okay, Brittney, catch me up on Jamon. Now, what was Jamon's earliest memory of art?
So he was in an environment that totally was like, of course you're an artist. And so that was echoed and affirmed for him at a very young age. His father was a percussionist, or is a percussionist, and still performs to this day as a professional percussionist. His mom didn't, as far as I know, didn't consider herself as a creative, but was so nurturing and affirming that if her children said, like, this is what I want to do, she was like, yeah, this is what you're going to do. Like, and she actually affirmed me. This is why I went back to college. We were dating and we were over to their house, like just Sunday dinner. And we were just kind of talking about me and my journey and what I'm doing. And she was like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I really do like, art and would love to do that, but I don't have time for that. And I'm working. And she was like, you need to go back to college. You need to go to school, like do that thing. And I was like, oh, okay. And then Jamon, of course, was like, yeah, I've been telling her, like, because again, I'm working, but when I get off, I'm like tinkering around. I'm like, making jewelry, and I'm like painting on this random thing. And I'm like really kind of like, I'm collecting things, and I'm like smashing bottle caps that I'm taking home from being a bartender. And I'm like keeping all the caps that I'm pulling off of beers, and I'm smashing them down, and I'm composing them on a canvas. And I'm so it's like I'm in conversation with Jamon's mom, and Jamon is like, yeah, she's like creating stuff all the time. She should go back. And I went back to college. But I was like totally not. I'm totally okay with like working my job and like doing that.
Now, what kind of job were you doing?
I was working at an animal hospital. And so I started as like a front desk person. So while I was in school, I think this is how the timeline goes. I was in school and I was waiting tables and didn't want to wait tables anymore. And so I made a resume, and I literally printed like 100 copies of my resume, and I put them in the car, and I drove down Park, and every office that it looked like was an office, I would go in and say, hi, my name is Brittney. I am, looking for a job here. Here's my resume. I just wanted to drop it off to see if there were any, openings available, and yada, yada, yada. So I did my spiel, and I did that for hours. I would just like pop into different offices for everything from, and I knew I wanted an office job. I was very specific about that, but what kind of office, I didn't care. So I was in like dental offices, medical offices, animal hospitals. I'm like, whatever. This particular moment, I took my resume into an animal hospital, and the woman who was there, she was pregnant and about to go on maternity leave. And she looked at me. I was talking to her, and then the phone rang. So she grabbed the call and was like, hold on. She gave me like the hold on signal. And so I waited. And when she got off the phone, she was like, oh, your resume looks good. And I had worked at Rafferty's. She had worked at Rafferty's. So she was like, oh, I see you waited tables. Tell me more about that, and tell me more about like your organization skills. And I was like, well, yeah, as a server, I have to be able to manage multiple things at once. Like I'm because that's how you make your money. And so I'm very, very adept to like holding a lot of things and responding to cues. And, I'm just kind of like talking. And she's like, okay. She's like, well, when can you start? Like, when are you looking for? And I was like, well, whenever, like I would like to put in a 2-week notice. So I would need to, do that. And she was like, okay. And she was like, let me hold on to this, and I'll circle back. She called me back like 2 days later and was like, we have a job opening. I'm going on maternity leave. I need somebody. I came in, fast learner. I'm also going to work hard. So like I stayed later, and I was like, because I really want to understand it. So I want to get this filing system down. I want to get, because I was responsible for pulling medications for the animals and all this other stuff. And I rocked it out. I was like, I want this job, and I'm going to get this job. And so I worked with her for about a week, and she was like, you're hired. Like, we need you. And so I got the job.
Wow. Okay. And so now, how was it that you met Jaman?
Oh, right. So that story goes, we were at a nightclub, actually. And so both he and I.
Like it was a totally unthinkable thing.
Unthinkable thing.
Yeah.
It would be way more romantic to say that we met at a museum as we were both, coming across no. We were at a nightclub, and our friend groups had like pulled us out of the house. So it was like, oh, we're going to hang out tonight. You should come. And it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to go. It's like, no, you're going. So we both ended up there, and he was at the bar, and my friend was also at the bar getting drinks, and they sparked a conversation, and he told her he was an artist, and she was like, oh, my best friend's an artist. And so she made the introduction, and I was like, yeah, and Jaman still does this to this day. What kind of art do you make? And I'm like, oh, I kind of piddle around, blah, blah, blah. He bought me a drink, and yeah, okay. He asked me for my number. No, I'll tell you exactly what I did. I'm a little bit embarrassed by it now, but I had a couple of drinks, and he was kind of talking to me, and I remember saying to him, you should marry me. I know, very bizarre, just way too much. And his response was, well, I need to get to know you first, so let's like give me your number. And I was like, okay.
That's so funny. No, I mean, one of the things I wonder about as a person who really had never dated another artist until just recently, but like I'm curious, what was that, especially at that point? Because like,
man,
that's like an ego kind of a time, or maybe not. But
I think it's
like
more so now.
If I think of myself in college, I was for sure an egomaniac, and I can only imagine being paired with another artist who, of course, because all of us are egomaniacs, like how did you guys navigate that early on?
Because he was like so much further along than I was, he became my muse. So for me, he was kind of like the linchpin, very much like that art history course was. He was that for me at that moment. It was like, oh wow, here's a man who is very like determined and steadfast in him being an artist. And he's doing the things. I think at that time he was illustrating a book for someone, and like he had commissions, and like he was, it's like, oh, like you are a real-time thing, manifestation of what I potentially might want to be. And so he became my muse in that way. And I was in I was very much interested in like the idea of that. And so there was no ego for me. And he was very much so like, yeah, like it's possible kind of thing. It wasn't until way later where we were kind of, you know, where it became a little bit challenging around like, you know, it wasn't until I decided to affirm that I was an artist for myself. But I think early on, I wasn't calling even, you know, really saying like, yeah, I'm going to do art. Like I'm, you know, and so it wasn't an issue. It was kind of like, oh, wow, this is amazing. You're incredible.
I like this thing where his mom was sort of the impetus or sort of the encourager for you to go back to school. And so it sounds like you guys have been together for a million years.
14
years.
It'll be 15 in August.
Okay. And then, so you were saying he was ahead of you in terms of schooling.
Oh, for sure.
And so he was almost done when you were done?
Yeah, he was graduating college.
Okay.
When I was like had not gone back yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what did it look like in terms of, because I mean, I know that's also tricky, is like when you're both in school, there's a certain kind of dynamic. And then when one person finishes with school and then another person goes back to school, I would assume that that's a kind of a different dynamic too. So you ended up going back to school. What about your cohort there at the U of M? Because I remember one of the things I remember from your presentation several semesters ago was that photograph of you hanging out with the people who were also a part of your cohort. And I know that can be a really powerful part of it. And so what about the people that you were around there at the U of M?
So my experience with them was amazing, right? And I feel like if I had to explain that, it would be that they were, because, you know, I was in a cohort with people who were entrepreneurial too. So like I remember meeting Britt for the first time, who was coming, I think, back to Memphis from Texas. And she was like, again, like, I'm going to be an artist. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to own a ceramic studio and I'm going to sell pottery. Like, she was very clear about that. I had also met Lauren Carlson, who was also like making and selling jewelry. She had a brand and she's like, I'm doing that. Right. And so I think around me, there were people who were very entrepreneurial in the idea of art making. But then there were folks like, you know, Felicia and Liz, who were, I think Felicia and I were very much in what felt like the same boat, as in like, we are figuring this out. We're in the pot, right? And we're understanding the technicality of what we're making, right? The craft of making. And then I think about Liz, who was all like very fun and bubbly and conceptual in her thinking, where she were making like these really huge raccoons out of plastic bags, right? And then she would paint a raccoon as well and like juxtapose them together. So I had a very interesting mix of folks in my cohort who were interested in the entrepreneurial ways of being an artist, but also in the conceptual ways of being that. And so I think it helped to like feed all of those different sides of me as well. I remember though not being as interested in the concept and being more so interested in like how something was made. And that's probably because, now that I think about it, is because I was learning so much in the art history courses that I just wasn't sure yet. I just was not sure like where I'm going with this, and like it was just so much. And I was really okay with the idea of like tinkering around. And so I was much more interested in like, could I make a large stack of wood square triangles really well? Like, can I just do that? and like be at the sander and like figuring that out. So yeah.
Now, what about like faculty? You mentioned the art historian. Were there other faculty members that were particularly important for you in terms of thinking about your time at the U of M?
I wouldn't necessarily say that they had the pull that Julie McGee did. But I remember that they all brought a level of like, they all brought for me questions that had me pondering about certain things. Right. So when I think about one professor, it was all about like, okay, how does this connect to you personally? And then when I think about another professor, it was all about like, well, how does this exist in space, like in real time, space and time? But I think it was really Julie for me that really had an indelible mark on my experience.
That sounds good. And that's a pretty good place to pause. And that was the first of 3 interviews that I recorded with Brittney Boyd Bullock. Please join us next week when we will have the second part. Until then, thank you for listening.